Oink oink everyone, and welcome to Catchy Cartoons. Today's tutorial will be simple but fun as we learn to draw this chubby pig. So let's get started. Starting with the head, we'll create our rough drawing by blocking in some simple shapes and forms. This will help you determine the proportions and the pose of this little guy. We'll sketch in a centre line and an eye line as a guide for the facial elements. And let's give our chubby pig beady little eyes, because unfortunately pigs do tend to have poor eyesight compared to their other senses. Rough in the eyebrows. We'll indicate his jaw by flattening the bottom of the circle. Then give him a fairly long snout with that distinctive piggy flat disc at the end. What he lacks in vision is certainly made up for by his exceptional sense of smell. Then add another centre line on the end to help place the nostrils on either side. A gentle little smile, as this is a very sweet little pig. And we'll give him big, forward-facing ears to illustrate his alertness and curiosity. Now, as I work on the ears, I did want to remind you to take note how I've drawn his right eyebrow just slightly higher than the left, and how this adds to his expression. Always be on the lookout for some opportunities for asymmetry in your drawing, as asymmetry makes your finished drawing much more interesting to look at. For his body, we'll roughen an oval, about twice the size of his head. His legs will be quite simple, as essentially we'll be drawing 4 elongated W shapes. And what little piglet would be complete without a curly tail with a swishable tuft of hair at the end? And no, swishable is not a word. So now we've finished the rough and our foundation has been set. We'll move on to the fun part of the process and get started bringing this chubby little pig to life as we define the shapes and forms in this tie-down stage. Let's add a hint of the eyelids as we solidify those beady little eyes. We'll adjust the shape of his head by arcing the line down and along the length of the snout, then virtually straight up to the top of the head, and then a rather sharp right turn across to his ears. This makes the head bulkier and creates a much more interesting shape. Oh, and I just couldn't resist adding a few cute sprigs of hair at the very top too. We'll give a hint of the corner of his jaw as we sketch in the bottom of his head, incorporating the snout. And I think the end could be bigger and more triangular in shape. Now let's make the ears smaller by thinning them out at the top. And they are feeling a bit flat as well, so we'll add a little overlap at the top, and we'll give them more form by adding more curve to the line as we move down to the base of his ears. Add some definition to the nostrils and the mouth. And we'll just scratch in a couple of creases along the top of his snout to indicate the flexibility of this schnorfely appendage. Schnorfely? Also not a word, by the way, but just an excellent way to describe it. The body is looking a bit doughy, so we'll flatten the back and continue the line around his bottom and all the way down to the hooves. Let's add a little bit more volume to his underside, otherwise known as chubbiness, and add a subtle bit of anatomy by curving the line out to create his throat. This front leg could be a little thicker. We'll simply follow the rough for the 2 remaining legs. Knock in some lines to indicate the tops of his hooves, and let's add some volume to his curly tail. But I'm thinking the end of his tail is just a bit too big, so as we define the tufts of hair, we'll just make sure to keep within the contour of the ruff. Another couple of lines to add more dimension to the tail, and we're ready for the second tie-down stage. But first, let's take a moment here to just quickly review our drawing before we move on. I think you'll all be doing just fine, but in case there is something that looks a little off, now's the time for a quick fix so you can feel confident as we tackle the next stage of the process. And please do hit the like button if you're enjoying this video, subscribe too, and leave me a comment. This second tie-down stage is where we'll apply a darker and more committed line. I'm fairly pleased with the progress of this chubby pig, so there won't be much polishing to do, if any. We'll just carefully lay down our darker line through the eyes, head, snout, and ears. We go carefully so that we maintain the correct shapes and his sweet and curious expression. But now we can loosen up a little as we apply a bolder line through the body and the legs, but taking a little more care as we commit to the curly tail, remembering that it will be thicker near his bottom and then thin out towards the tuft at the end. Now, as we sketch in his markings, try to think in 3 dimensions by imagining how this biggest spot would actually be wrapping over and around his body. We'll sketch in some smaller spots, making sure to vary them in shape and size, because after all, he's not a polka-dotted pig. Let's add some tone now for a sense of finish and move on to the cleanup stage, where we'll finalize the style of the drawing by applying a clean and final line. And today I'll be using a very dark blue for the cleanup line, as we've discussed why we should avoid black in several of my other videos. With this pig being simple in design, we'll apply a thick, bold line with a variation of thicks and thins. We'll indicate the eyelids with some overlap and a thicker line at the top of the eyes. For simple or graphic designs such as this, I sometimes like to draw the irises beyond the eyeballs, as it helps define the eye direction. This head shape feels quite undefined, so I'll start the cleanup line just behind the ear and arc the line down to a clearly defined jaw. We'll make the head even more interesting by flattening out the bottom all the way along the snout. A nicely tapered line from thin to thick as we travel up the forehead, not forgetting about those silly little hairs at the top. 2 simple arcs for the eyebrows, but watch you don't lose that expression. I'm going to make this ear just a touch bigger. Then carefully clean them both up with some nice, bold, curved lines. We'll use a thinner line for the nostrils, mouth, and snout wrinkles. For his body, we'll start with a thin line that gradually becomes thicker as it rounds his back end, then continue that bold line throughout his whole underside and for all 4 legs. A thin line for the colour separation at the hooves, and don't worry that the colour separation lines extend outside the legs, as mine have done. This can actually work quite well with the nature of his design. We'll apply a fairly thick line along the tail, and since we are using such a thick line, we're going to make the tuft at the end of his tail bigger. And yes, I know, we made it smaller before, didn't we? However, in such a tight space, thick lines like this would just become mushy. Finally, we'll apply a thin line for his markings as we prepare to move on to the colour stage. Now, my chubby pig happens to be pink, but not a silly pink, so we'll use a nice muted colour for his base. A darker tone for the nostrils and inside the ears. Dark blue for the hooves, and a grey blue for his markings, and that sweet little tuft at the end of his tail. But as pigs come in many colours, why not get creative and have some fun with your colour choices? And there you go! You've just drawn one chubby little pig. I do hope you enjoyed this lesson today, and if you're interested in learning how to draw more cute animals, why not check out this video? And hey everybody, I really want you to know how much I appreciate you all watching, so I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.